Welcome back to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and this afternoon I'm joined by Liam Carrigan, who is dialing in from Japan. It's 9:30 in the evening for Liam. We've got Ian Conroy, who's dialing in from New Zealand, and it's 1:30 in the morning. Massive kudos to you, Ian, for getting involved at 1:30 in the morning, and Lawrence Connolly, a mile and a half away from Celtic Park. We've all got Celtic on the mind. I'm actually going to pull this one up straight off the bat, Liam. Stephen Sloan's asking about Iguchi. It's a good opportunity to talk about two Japanese players for two very different reasons. Stephen asks, Iguchi has been nominated for Player of the Season over in Japan. Is there a way back for him at Celtic, or has that ship sailed? And I want to also follow that up, Liam, by asking your view on Iwata and whether or not he can change Brendan's mind. Because I'm not sure Brendan fancies him, but every time he plays, he puts in a positive contribution. What's your take on the two Japanese players, Liam?
Right, Iguchi has had an excellent season with Fukuoka. He has been nominated. Unfortunately, I don't think he's going to win the award because it tends to go to one of the players at one of the top teams, and Fukuoka are not a top team. You know, it will most likely be, someone that's playing for Vissel Kobe or Yokohama Marinos or something. It will be one of the top four teams. But Iguchi has been excellent. He's had a very good season. And part of me wonders, should Celtic have another look at him? But on the other hand, I think, is he playing better because he's just more comfortable in the J League? Mm-hmm. That's a consideration, because every time he's come to Europe, now granted, there's been a lot of nasty injuries and he's been very, very unlucky in that regard, but he has yet to have like a good solid season anywhere in Europe. And yet every time he plays in Japan, he's excellent. He was excellent with his, I think it was Osaka was his previous club before we signed him. He had a good season there. And he's been consistently good whenever he's played in Japan, which is why he keeps getting linked with moves to Europe.
Yeah.
But it's just, sometimes you get players who just can't quite make that step up. I mean, one example that I remember, although he did go on to be successful elsewhere in Europe, was Shinji Ono when he came to Arsenal. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of talk about him. And then I think there was another one, Junichi Inamoto, who I don't know if he even played a game for Arsenal, despite a lot of hype. Both those guys went on to do well elsewhere in Europe, but, at the top level, they just weren't quite there. I do wonder if that's the case with Iguchi. I hope not. I mean, I would love to see him come back to Celtic and do something, but we're very top heavy in midfield.
Yeah.
We are going to have to ship out several midfielders, I think, before we can look at bringing any in. And if Iguchi comes in, it is effectively, it's a new signing, because it's a guy that Rodgers did not have as part of his squad. So Rodgers would have to look at it from that perspective. Is this a guy that I would have signed if I had looked at him before? And I don't know if he would, because I think this season particularly, our new acquisitions from Asia have not done that well so far. Jury's out on Yang. Mm-hmm. O is coming on to a good game. He's looking better every time he plays, but he's still not quite there. Kobayashi, I think I've got a better chance of getting a game at the moment than he has, unfortunately. And then Kyogo and Dyson are excellent, but they're injured. And Dyson's injured, Hatate's injured. Kyogo is being played out of position, so it's not going well for him at the moment either. And something makes me wonder, is it just generally that Brendan Rodgers doesn't really fancy these types of players from that market?
Well, Iwata is the big question mark for me, because I'll come to you, Ian. Liam and I have been speaking about Iwata since he signed. I've not seen him playing a particularly bad game for Celtic. I think there was a few games he was played out of position through necessity at the end of Ange Postecoglou's reign, where Kobayashi wasn't fit for purpose. Iwata played centre-half in the Scottish Cup final. And then during the pre-season, he was filling in at right-back. But I think when he plays in the midfield, Ian, and again, by the way, I've got to say, yes, I am half blind, but also I was suffering a wee bit of the old COVID. And I kept saying it was Mikey Johnson that set up Jamesy Forrest. It wasn't. And I've been corrected time and time again on that one. I think Iwata, every time he plays in the midfield, Ian, he makes a positive contribution. I was making the comparison rather. Remember when Tommy Burns came to Celtic and he really had to, for a spell, work with what he had at his disposal. And then he was able to bring in Phil O'Donnell, and then he could bring in Van Hooijdonk. And slowly but surely he started putting his own mark on the team. But the one player that didn't really get a crack of the whip until late in that first season was Rudi Vata. And Rudi has spoken about it since. He said, Tommy made it pretty clear, you're not my player, I don't rate you, and we will try and ship you out. But Vata, being Vata, stuck it out, proved himself to the gaffer, got into the team. And I'm looking at Iwata, and I'm thinking, I don't know if Rodgers rates him that highly, but every time he plays, Ian, you cannot ignore that he's contributing positively. And I think he did that again at the weekend.
Yeah, well, Rodgers has come out and said the thing that all managers have to say, really, which is, you earn the right for my consideration in training. So it's the effort, and how much they actually are putting in the application, how switched on and tuned in they are, in training. And I think any manager, all the old greats would say as well, I think was it Bill Shankly, it's kind of like, when you're here, you're under absolute scrutiny from every second you're here at the club. Mm-hmm. And that's only right when any football, the odds of being a professional footballer in any league is difficult. You look at the competition, but when you move up to the higher echelons and the elite teams, the bigger supported teams like Celtic, the scrutiny is always there, so you can never switch off. So with Iwata, you're right. It's like come in and give someone the best possible chance, which is put a round peg in a round hole. Unless they're one of these kind of utility players that they can adapt. But even then, if you're trying to assimilate into a new team in a new league, to be out of your comfort zone and then lost further by being in a different position, you're kind of stacking the odds, against them, and succeeding. Mm-hmm. There's some paper talk, which I concur with some of it. I shared it in the group chat yesterday. I don't know if it was just devilment. I think it was in the Daily Record about sort of some players sort of revolving around in position. So Iwata being that holding midfielder, allowing Callum McGregor to move further up and more advanced as he did before when Scott Brown was in the team, and Naoki coming in the centre half position, and Liam Scales maybe moving to left back and trying him there. I think he'd be quite comfortable in there as well. But it would be nice to see Iwata get a chance in that holding midfielder position, which is his. He was player of the season, wasn't he, in J League before we signed him?
Yeah, most valuable.
So, again, touching upon what Liam said, that's no guarantee that you're going to succeed outside of the J League, But when he's come on, I agree. He looks a decent player and worth a decent run. Imagine if Callum McGregor was injured, he'd slot in there quite nicely. But obviously that's not happening. So, but yeah, I think he's worth a shout for sure.
Well, when we look at it, Lawrence, and we look at Brendan Rodgers, assessing his squad and that particular position, the Hatate jersey, let's call it the Hatate jersey, right? And you've tried Odin Holm in there, you've tried Paolo Bernardo, and David Trimbal's had games. And I think those three players all bring different things to the table. David Trimbal's contribution is pretty obvious. He's a guy that gets involved in goals, mainly scoring them, and he does that from distance. But you look at some parts of his game that aren't quite there, particularly the defensive side of things. The one player that's not really had a decent run, and certainly a start, is Iwata. I'm looking ahead to Wednesday night's game, tomorrow night's game against Hibs, and I'm thinking, well, if it's on merit, then surely Iwata gets the jersey. Lawrence, what do you make of it? Is it a case of Rodgers not really fancying him, but he won't be able to ignore him if he continues to come on and take his opportunities as he did at the weekend?
I think maybe he's using the same data as Alan Morrison does and saying, look, Callum can't really play further forward now. He's lost that bit of pace, so I need to play him at the 6. And he's unfortunate that Callum's playing at the 6. He's a most dependable player, Callum, the amount of minutes he plays. You've got to look at who's keeping him out of the team. I think that's what it comes down to. I'd like to see Callum push further forward. I've not looked at the data, the stats, but I know Alan has, and he says, look, pace-wise, he's not really got it there to go further forward. If he did play further forward, I think Iwata's your man. If Callum gets injured, Iwata comes in. It's just who's in front of him in the team just now. And it's unfortunately for him, it's Callum that's in front of him as that defensive player. And as for Gucci coming back and having another look, we're kind of forced into that, aren't we, when he's loan ends, unless they buy him? We don't really have a choice. We'll be backing our player, and I'm sure Brendan will run the rule over him. Most valuable player in Japan. He's obviously not a bad footballer, and obviously that Scottish Cup game that we picked up a few injuries in. I'm not too sure what the refs were doing that day, but Callum picked up an injury as well.
I think we covered that game, didn't we, Lawrence?
Yeah, we covered it together, yeah. Yep. And he was really unlucky. He was having a decent game. It was just a horrendous tackle on him. I think it was at Leeds he was at, Liam, before he didn't really get in the team, yeah. And it didn't work for him there. But, when it came over, you'd hopes for him. And he's went back and proven that he's a player. It could be that, he's more comfortable in the J-League, but
yeah,
I think Williams touched on how technical the J-League is. And even the team he takes can recycle the ball in 13 seconds. Yeah, so I think Gucci will have another look at him unless they take up the option to buy.
I'm going to ask Liam about that. What is the likelihood of Celtic making anything back on this player? Because obviously it's not worked out here at Celtic. He's proved that he's very comfortable playing at the level in Japan. His style of football seems to suit him. If he was to go back there, what kind of transfer fees are we talking, Liam? What's the general transfer fee? Nowhere near 850 grand.
I know we could probably get that. I mean, we'd probably get that back. But yeah, you're talking like 1 to 2 million tops, right? I mean, I think the record signing in the J League was a few years ago. I think it was either Nagoya Grampus or Urawa Reds paid about 8 million for some Brazilian guy who turned out to be a dud. And that stung because that was about 4 times what the previous record fee was. I think the previous sort of record fee for a player going into Japan was about 2 or 3 million. And
right.
Since then, teams have been reluctant to kind of push beyond that because Japan also has, I mean, you look at how the national team is doing now at all levels, male and female. The youth development in Japan is phenomenal. As Lawrence touched on, I'm lucky enough to be kind of, tangentially involved in that through my high school team. It's really good to see that there's just so many young players coming through there that they don't have to sign players from Europe. They really don't. When the J League first started, it was augmented by guys like Gary Lineker, Pierre Litbarski, Zico, basically over the hill European players who went there for one last big payday. I mean, Lubo was actually in Japan for a very, very short spell with Jeff United Chiba before he signed for Celtic.
And then you've got Rudy Vata. Rudy was over there as well, the aforementioned.
Yep. And, the point is that Japan has moved beyond that model now. So they don't pay European transfer fees and they generally don't sign European players now. If you've got there's a 5 foreigners rule in the J League. And generally those foreigners are usually either Korean, Southeast Asian, Australian or Brazilian. And quite often the Brazilians end up nationalizing as Japanese because it's easier to do that if you're from Brazil. There's some sort of visa agreement there. So yeah, they wouldn't sign a player from a European club unless it was for a knockdown fee. But we're talking about an MVP. If he wants to stay in the J League, there's every chance another J League club might come in for him, and it might be a bigger one like Urawa Reds or Yokohama Marinos who can pay the money. And then we might even turn a wee profit. We might get $1 million for him or something like that. But it won't be any more than that because that's just not the market in Japan.
I'm just thinking not only Iguchi, I think also Kobayashi, who you mentioned, we're potentially going to be doing business this January with Japanese clubs to offload those 2 players. Albeit maybe it's going to be a loan deal for Kobayashi initially, but it will be interesting because I don't, even though he's done well, I'm looking at that situation thinking he's done well. that's good because his stock's going to be pretty high to move him on, rather than Iguchi's going to come back and make his mark. Because there are other players at Celtic, I think, Iwata being the main one, who deserve a crack at a first-team jersey, and hopefully he'll get it tomorrow night. What do you make of where we are just now, going into the January transfer window? Let us know in the comments section. Also, you know, marry that into some of Brendan Rodgers' recent comments. He's coming out fighting, and I like that version of Brendan Rodgers, coming out fighting, basically laying down the gauntlet for the Celtic board. And I'm going to have a wee look back at what's happened previously in January transfer windows for Brendan at Celtic. The fact that he comes back to the club and he talks about the recruitment approach being pivotal to him accepting the role second time round at Celtic Park, and obviously if that has worked out. And then of course a big shout out yesterday to the guys Kevin Graham, Jerry Taylor and Acsom Rabani, who ran the show without me, and it went down a storm. So I don't know what that says about me, but thank you to the guys, and I hope you enjoyed that as well. Double denim. January is a tricky window for us. Traditionally, deals tend to be overpriced, and finding the right players is difficult, but we need a statement of intent from Rodgers and the board. Right, loads has been spoken about. Let's have a wee chat about what we're about to move into in January. And I was looking back at how, you know, everything ended, and it all ended a bit in a grotty manner with Brendan Rodgers leaving the club. I'm going to bring up 4 examples here, right? Because Brendan has spoken about the recruitment strategy. He spoke about it when he came to Celtic, and he cited Mark Lowell as having done a brilliant job of bringing in players that fitted into Celtic's player profile. He described the Japanese imports in particular as being sensational. So it's something that he has obviously been sold. He's been sold the fact that we've improved on the recruitment thing, but he's obviously been given all the good examples. When he comes in to the club, there are deals already in the offing. We know that. I mean, the day that Odin Holm was presented to the press was the same day that Brendan Rodgers was presented to the press. Odin Holm was already in the door. He was asked about him in his first press conference, and he spoke highly of the player. As he had to, really. He's a 20-year-old, £2.5 million coming in from Norwegian football, and Brendan got behind that. Later on, he spoke about, you know, developing the players that he is presented with. But in recent times, his tone has changed when he's speaking, because it looks to me as though the players he's been presented with are not of the calibre that he was expecting. Now, when he left the club back in 2019, Brendan had suffered a few dodgy Januaries. If we go back to 2017, lads, right? Ibu Kouassi, remember him? 2.8 million quid we signed Kouassi for. He was signed from Krasnodar in January 2017. He went on to play a grand total of 967 minutes of football in 3.5 years. Marvin Comper, he cost £1 million from RB Leipzig in January 2018, and he played 83 minutes of football against Greenock Morton under Brendan Rodgers. Then we had Marian Sved, who was another 1.7 million quid, paid to a club called Karpaty Lviv in January 2019. Never kicked a ball under Brendan Rodgers. And I'm going to seal this quadruple up with Vakun Bayu, who was brought in from the giants of football, Dunaska Streda, in January 2019 for 2 million quid. He played a grand total of 60 seconds of football under Brendan Rodgers. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is there are concerns, Liam, that some of the guys that were brought in around about the same time as Brendan came back are simply not good enough. He's not playing them. You know, he's played home. He's played Tilio for a minute. He's spoken about Gustav Lagerbielke and Nawrocki being fit, but he's obviously not impressed enough. And in fact, Scales has done really well to keep them out. But he's been presented with player Kwon being another one, never kicked a ball, that are not good enough. They're not good enough quality to replace the guys that have already left, and they're not good enough quality to enhance the squad. That's why we're sitting with 1 point out of 5 games in the Champions League, the bottom of the table. Liam, is it a concern for you? Can we put it right in January?
Can we? Yes. Will we? I'm not sure. because you've just rhymed off there. Historically, we do not do well in January windows. Probably the only exception was when we signed our Japanese trio.
Yeah.
And even then, only 2 of those ultimately worked out. So, and the jury was out on Dyson for probably about the first 6 months before he found his niche. And if you ask some people, the jury's still out on him, but that's another story. The thing is that I really think we need to freshen up the team. I was talking to the boys in Celtic Down Under the other day about the weekend's game, and this might sound like hyperbole, but I said that first half, it was like watching somebody play FIFA who doesn't know the controls. It was like these guys have they even seen a football at some point? It really was just amateur hour.
Turgid. And
I get how angry Brendan Rodgers was, because as a fan, I was equally angry watching it. Turned it around in the second half, but that team badly needs freshening up. There is a lot of deadwood there, and unfortunately, I think some of it was playing at the weekend. David Turnbull is a fantastic footballer, right? And I think he should be in the Scotland squad for the Euros next year. But he's not going to get that while he's a bit part player at Celtic. And he's never going to be any more than a bit part player at Celtic, I don't think. His goals record is excellent, considering the number of minutes that he's had. But ask yourself, why does he have so few minutes?
Yeah.
Ultimately, the manager doesn't fancy him. And neither do I, if I'm being quite honest. I think Iwata should be in there ahead of him. And we talk about McGregor being freed up to go further forward. He stepped up and scored the goal that ultimately took us on to win the game at the weekend by making that forward run. So I think that does slightly kind of push back on the argument that he's not got the legs for it anymore, because he did it when he had to at the weekend. And he consistently does it for Scotland as well. He plays in a much more advanced role for Scotland.
Yeah.
And look at what they're doing right now. I never thought I would say this, but the Scottish national team are a benchmark we should look at just now for what you can achieve with a team that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Absolutely, Liam. It's a great point you make, because we're constantly being told that things are beyond us because of where we play our football. But my argument is we're not even punching at our weight. We're not punching at our weight. I mean, this particular Champions League campaign, we're sitting with 1 point, but we've gone into it having not strengthened the side. So you can't tell me that 1 point is a maximum Celtic could have achieved had we gone into the transfer market with some kind of purpose, rather than signing players that largely were for progression so that we could then sell them on at their optimum price, which is the words used by the chairman when he was speaking about the record-breaking figures in our accounts. So this is some of the frustrations that we have. David Turnbull, I agree, is a phenomenal football player. If you look at him since he signed for the club and you want to break down his minutes and talk about goal contributions, assists and goals, the results are phenomenal. Does that mean he should be playing in the team? I agree with you right now. No, I think he's a great option off the bench at the moment. Sometimes when you're trying to break down a team, a side who have got a really resolute defence, David Turnbull's excellent for that. But as a 90-minute footballer for Celtic, no, he's not doing it for me on a consistent basis. On Wednesday night, I've already said it, I'd be playing Iwata. Now, Lawrence has picked up on a point that has been raised by the data guys, which is that Callum McGregor can't play a more advanced role. Can we challenge that? Can we challenge it, Liam? Because you've said there, I mean, what are we up against in Scottish football? Are we up against elite athletic beings who you need to have such a turn of pace to be contributing in an offensive sense? Now, Lawrence, you pitched the idea and you disagreed with it because you think Callum can do a job offensively. Yeah. And I think he can do a job offensively. I'm being told by those who look at the specific data that it's not possible. Is it as simple as that, Ian? I'll throw it out to you. The data suggests Callum can't play an offensive role. Therefore, Iwata won't get a game. Callum must play number 6. Is it as simple as that to you?
Maybe this is a stupid question. Was this data taken from games? And if it is, then he's playing the defensive position. He's being measured on the position he's being played.
Yeah.
So how could they measure him in a more advanced position if he's not playing that? I don't know. Was it formed partly with in training? He's been measured in a more advanced role in training, and it's not stacking up. Don't know. Can someone tell us? Do you know that, Lawrence?
It's a good point, Ian, right? If he's playing defensively, then his offensive stats are going to go down, Lawrence. I think in a nutshell, that's what I'm thinking. And he has been playing that role for a few seasons.
Any data outside the club's just going to be on games, isn't it? Inside the club, they should have data from training as well. There's an argument about, it's not match day intensity at training, though, isn't it? Does he give you that bit extra like he did at the weekend? In turn a game for us. There's extra pressure in games. I think he absolutely could play further forward. I've not looked up the data, but I've heard it floated. That's the reason why.
Yeah,
and you can see why. Iwata's not playing in front of McGregor. I think Iwata's got the potential to be the best midfielder at the club, but to prove that, he's going to need minutes.
Games.
And we're struggling further forward. You've touched on it. What do we face in Scotland? Europe's gone. Pushing further forward, develop Iwata, because he's on our books. If we're going to want to move him on for money, he's going to need minutes. Either that, we're writing off another fee. You've got. I think it's about squad management, and it probably comes back to our recruitment as well. Brendan's touched on it. The squad's too big. How many project players can you have? They need better players to help develop them. They need minutes on the park. If you've got 12 project players, they're not doing it. I think we've got a squad of 30 odd. I think 1 and 2 of the squad is paid to stay at home in match day. They're not in the match day squad. It's a lot of money kind of going down the tube. And these project players, we'll look at Iguchi. The size of the squad, it wasn't really giving him a chance to play. And I know he got hampered by injury, but there's other players that have been here that went elsewhere, and you thought, I think Shred been okay when he went elsewhere. Didn't really get a chance. And talk about wingers, how many do we need? I would say, Palmer came in as a project player, Tilo came in as a project player, Jan came in as a project player. How many minutes are these project wingers going to get? It's kind of 3 of them. At least 3 project wingers. Maybe Tilo as well. 4. It's too many, isn't it? I think as a club, we're going to need to look and go, right, we need at least 8 Champions League level players if we want to progress. And then you look and go, right, how else do we fill the squad? Is it another 8 that are the best in the SPL? That have got, we'll do for the home matches, and every now and again a decent performance in Europe. And then you're looking to fill it, with projects we've brought in or youth after that. But you need to kind of define, we're all saying it's too many projects, but I suppose to know what too many is, you need to define how many we're looking for at a club like Celtic. Is it 8? Is it 12? Is it 16? Is it 4? It's all right saying we've got too many. Well, has anyone decided how many we should have at any one time? And you've got to do some kind of analysis and go, well, we've got 6 project players. We can't have them all in the same positions because they're going to limit each other's game time.
Absolutely.
So, we need to kind of spread them about the team and think, how will they get game time? How will we develop them? Because we don't have a reserve league. It needs to be first team minutes. And especially anyone we're paying a few million quid for. It's going to be for the first team, isn't it? Because what we're saying to the boys we're developing. And let's say that Vatter's looked okay in the reserves. Has he stood out? No, but neither did Kieran Tierney. He wasn't standing out of the reserves or the B team or whatever we want to call it, or the under 21s as it was. Some players, they need that minutes in the first team. They show they can do it. Show they can become a player. They're playing with better players. That extra pressure. Some people respond to that in the first team. And I think there's a lot of things wrong. And Brendan's touched on it. The squad size far too big.
Mm-hmm.
We've got too many projects. I think they need to kind of go back to basics and go, right, what we're looking for. How many players in each section do we need?
When you're talking about the tier of player, Lawrence, and you're talking about Champions League quality player, we're not saying that Celtic need to go out and spend 60 million quid on a fullback. What we're saying is, from the squad we have, the players who can step up to that level and compete. And we do have a number of players who can do it. I named Ming last week, and I think that Matt O'Reilly, for example, is in that category. I think Kyogo's in that category. And I included Callum McGregor in there as well. I think my team, when I look at this, the strongest Celtic starting 11 had 5 or 6 players in there who I'm happy with going into a Champions League game. And it's a case then of bringing in another 2 or 3 players of that kind of quality, Lawrence, and then having a tier system where just under that, you've got guys who can do your job at, domestically, like you say, but you've also got ones who are developing into the type of player who becomes a Matt O'Reilly and a Rio Atati. The player that you would be confident going into the Champions League. But you raise a point there about youth and coming through. We don't have it. That's virtually been scrapped at Celtic because we don't have the players that are coming through. We've got 3 different locations: Celtic Park, Lennoxtown, Barrowfield, and we're not producing young players to play for Celtic. Because every time I say it, people say, well, we produced Ben Doak and we produced Liam Morrison, we produced all these guys that Liverpool and Bayern Munich want to sign, but it's not working for us as a football club. And the latest example of that is Rocco Vata. So just to confirm, because I've read various blogs over the last couple of weeks about Vata knocking back a deal and all this, Rocco Vata's not been offered a deal by Celtic. This season here was the ultimate opportunity. If he wasn't going to be part of the plans, because we've signed 3 wingers to replace Jota, if he wasn't going to be part of the plan, loan him out. And he should have been loaned out this summer. And he should have been out there right now getting game time and getting that competitive edge that you don't get playing in the 5th tier of Scottish football. The thing is, Lawrence, I feel sorry for the boy because he can only play against the teams that he's selected against. And when he's doing that, both on an international level or when we play the likes of Lazio as he did the other week, he's actually stepping up and he's performing well, but he's not getting the opportunity. Why is he not getting the opportunity? Because you've got all these blocks in front of him. You've got the 3 guys that were signed for money, and Tillio and Yang and Palmer, they're in front of him. Jamesy Forrest with his experiences ahead of him, as is Mikey Johnson, who's actually done pretty well. We'll talk about him as well. And then you've got other guys who obviously are out injured at this moment in time in Maeda and Abada. Rocco Vata's so far behind in the pecking order. The boy's not going to get a game of football at Celtic. So what we should have done is recognise that he's got bags of potential and loaned him out in the summer. He could have been out there right now playing competitive football, Liam, and that's where we do it wrong, isn't it? I mean, we've heard the rumours around Inter Milan, Sampdoria being interested in the player. We'll get 300 grand, whatever it is, when he goes. And that saddens me because we do have 3 locations. We've got a youth academy that's costing £3 million a year, and we're producing nothing for Celtic.
No, I mean you look at where our young players have gone, likes of Liverpool, Bayern Munich, Italy, a couple of clubs in Italy. What is the common denominator? They all have B teams that are allowed to play at a decent level.
Yeah,
just a couple of tiers below. In the case of the German league, just a couple of tiers below the Bundesliga. Mm-hmm. The standard of the English reserve league is very, very high. Italy has a similarly, progressive setup. And at the end of the day, who do you want? With the greatest of respect to these teams, who would you rather play against? Whitehill Welfare or the Borussia Dortmund second string? I think it's not really a contest, is it? Even if you go to somebody like Bayern Munich and you're miles away from the first team, just being part of that squad and playing even at the 2nd or 3rd tier of German football is going to make you a much, much better footballer than playing on public parks in the West of Scotland league is. It's just the unfortunate reality of it. But what we should be doing is, okay, I'll rhyme off a few players here, right? Kwon, Kobayashi, possibly Tillio, right? 3 guys that are unlikely to get a game anytime soon. Mm-hmm. Loan each of them to teams in the Scottish Premiership. Because 1, it will get them tuned up to what they need to do to play at that level. And 2, they just might score a goal against our rivals or have a great performance against our rivals, which will endear them to the Celtic support when they do come home. Ryan Christie being the classic example of, and Liam Scales, of how that can work.
Yeah, yep. Exactly. I mean, it makes sense, right? These are assets to our club who are not contributing. I'd throw Lagerbielke in there as well, by the way, because I don't think it looks good if we sell him in January, because all the words that have been said around Brendan Rodgers being, the guy that signs off every deal and all that, you tear that up and throw it in the bin if you sell one of them in January. If you put one out on loan, like Lagerbielke, like Tillio, like you're saying, Kwon, these guys are not going to get games the second half of the season. But I've always been of the view, Ian, that try and do it in the Scottish game if you can, because, I like the fact that we're setting up partnerships with Admira Wacker, for example, but that's more to do with the youth development. Guys that are too good for the B team, get them game time over there. We might have a similar philosophy, a similar style of play to the clubs that we partner with. That's great. I think that's a brilliant thing. It's a step forward. But see all these other guys who are kind of like in purgatory, where they're first team squad players that are never playing, as Lawrence says, are getting paid every single week to go to training, basically. Get them out there and play games. And not only that, play against Rangers. Play against their challengers and maybe damage them. If you're a goalie, you might save a penalty. If you're a striker, you might score a goal against them. Is that too basic as well? Because these are things that are screaming at me every single time I look at that squad list and the guys that are not contributing.
There's another thing to it, though. If we go to sign another project player, we obviously have identified he's decent. His agent's going to go, well, what happened in the last project? Oh, yeah, you get 12 of them, you don't play.
Yeah.
That's not going to be good for my client's development. Why would I go tell him to go to Celtic? He wants to play. And I get players have to believe that he's joining, believing he's going to play. But if he's also looking, going, geez, you've got 12 projects in your books you've done nothing with, that don't get game time, are you really going to treat me any differently?
The point I made. Yeah, sorry, on you go, Ian.
I said this before about my children, my hypothetical situation that mine, or I'm sure lots of dads would say, a lot of people are seduced by the sort of the bright lights of the big teams. I'd rather my children went to a Motherwell or a Hamilton or where there's a quicker pathway to a first team role, with these smaller teams, and then shine in that smaller pond, and try and achieve a career in professional football that way. Because the stats show that young players, as talented as they might be, the Van Dokes and the like, it's quite rare. A lot of them drop away. A lot of players who've looked quite promising over the years in Celtic's reserves, and not reserves, but sort of youth teams.
Yeah,
and they've dropped away to nothing. It's probably count on two hands, perhaps. Team players that have gone out and had a decent career and actually in football, albeit at a lower level. So I said exactly the same thing as Liam was saying, and you're echoing, well, John, and it's get them into it's the same league. They'll play on the same pitches. They'll play against the same defenders or strikers or whatever, and it will allow them to either hit or miss, to assimilate into the league for definite. And we've got a track record of that working, with IR, Scales, Ryan Christie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, without a doubt. And, it's great to have first team games. And I'm pretty sure it would be better to play them anywhere than not at all. But I just think if we've got more of a focus on it, I mean, there's clubs all over who have got loan managers. Their entire job is to deal with the loanees, who we have got loaned all over the world. Gary Caldwell had that job for Man City for a spell, where you're basically dealing with the loan players that are basically playing all over the globe. I think it would make sense if we did that. And you know what? It brings up the other question here, because we're talking about the midfield scenario, and some of us on the show today are thinking, give Iwata a chance. All we are saying is give Iwata a chance, says the Urban Culture in the comment section. What do you make of it? It's kind of taken us into that area of youth development, as it often does on a Celtic State of Mind, because we're frustrated by it. But we'll come back to some of the other areas of the park that will be under scrutiny tomorrow night when the starting 11 is announced an hour before kick-off. The Urban Culture been off the scene for a few days, listening to yesterday's show, and was about to make a comment here. Well, it's great to see you back, Urban Culture. I watched and listened to yesterday's show as an audience member, so it was great fun. Apologies, I couldn't make it myself. I was otherwise engaged in Acsom business somewhere else. Patrick Murphy, I don't care how much a player costs. I'm more concerned with who's identifying the targets. Is our recruitment team really the best it can be? They could spend £50 million and still end up with one Champions League point. Yes, Absolutely, you could. And all you need to do is look at some of the similar teams who are in a position like Celtic at the foot of their Champions League group. They've spent a lot of money. It doesn't guarantee success. My point constantly, though, were we well enough prepared for this campaign? The answer is no, we weren't. Because we've gone out there into the transfer market and we've purchased a number of players, 9 players in total. And the point I keep making is, Odin Thiago Holm, one for the future. He's played 322 minutes this season under Brendan Rodgers. Marco Tilio, although injured for a spell, has played a minute of football. Kwon hasn't kicked a ball. Norowski, 247 minutes, albeit he has been injured. And Lagerbielke, 529 minutes. You've also got Phillips and Bernardo, the 2 loanees. Phillips has played 270 minutes. Bernardo, 382 minutes of football. We've played 21 games of football so far. And in total, those players have combined 1,751 minutes. 7 players playing the equivalent of under 20 games combined at a total cost of £12.5 million, plus the loan fees, plus the wages. That's no good business, Liam, is it?
No. And it touches on a number of issues there. Like, first of all, I don't think we should be signing loan players anymore. I think that particular ship has sailed. We need to be developing players with a view to them playing in the Champions League. So what is the point in it? Again, Phillips, great player. I understand why we had to sign him because of the emergencies, and we didn't realise then that Scales was going to step up as he did. But we should never have been in that boat. We should have been better prepared. The thing is, you and I are not professional football analysts, right? We're fans at the end of the day. And we watch the games and we can see the deficiencies in the Celtic team pre-season. We can see that we need fullbacks reinforced. We can see that we need a goalkeeper that's going to actually challenge Joe Hart. We can see that the team needs freshening up. Now, if we can see that, you better believe that Feyenoord, Lazio and Atletico Madrid's backroom team saw it and exploited it.
Yeah.
That is the issue. If us fans can see it, why the hell can't the board see it? Or why do they choose not to see it? Well, we know the answer. It's because as long as we beat Rangers, we're all right.
Yes, because
you're
right.
Yeah.
You're right. The guys that we've brought in there, Liam, right? No other team in Scotland beyond Celtic and Rangers can spend that kind of money. I'm not getting into where the money comes from. Can spend that kind of money. We should be able to beat every other team in the league by spending and having that outlay. £7.5 million on 2 centre-halves. The reason we were in the position, Liam, going back to the Nat Phillips thing, the reason we were in that position was because we had signed a centre-half in Kobayashi. Again, poor recruitment. It's not worked out. So we had signed the player. He was in the building. We had an injury crisis at that moment in time. And there are certain players within the squad, even when you've got an injury crisis, you cannot call upon because they're simply not up to the standard. It concerns me a bit, Ian, that when the gaffer's talking about the fitness of Nawrocki, the question was asked yesterday about Mike Nawrocki. Is he fit to play? Yes, he is. He is fit, as is Gustav Lagerbielke. He's looking at them at training every single day. They're not doing enough at training. He's talking about personality and also the fact that Liam Scales doesn't deserve to be dropped. I was reading a report the other day. I don't know how much weight we can put behind it, that Scales is now gathering interest from other European sides, and the Lecter are apparently interested in Scales. We've got a scenario in January where we should be putting Kobayashi back out, probably not selling him, depending on whether or not we can get a bid. He might go back to Japan. Nat Phillips, we should be sending him back to Anfield. We've got that option in. So there's 2 central defenders down. You're then looking at Lagerbielke and Nawrocki. You've got the 2 guys who are your first choices, and you've also got Welsh. Is that strong enough to see us through the rest of the domestic campaign? Yeah, it should be. Absolutely should be. But come the end of the season, you're then questioning whether or not Lagerbielke's got a long-term future at Celtic. That's bad recruitment again, Ian, isn't it? I mean, Stephen Welsh for me is probably going to get a game before Lagerbielke does.
Yeah, well, would we have signed him if Welsh didn't get that injury? Maybe not. He's got the same agent as Starfelt, so I don't know. That was a bit of a muddy waters. I did note that Brendan said when he was talking about attitude in training, you know, if you're not stepping up in training, then you're not going to get a sniff of getting any minutes. He mentioned that Nat Phillips seemed to be a bit of a leader, or he was showing that attitude. So, Liam, I agree with lots of stuff, but in terms of the loan market, it's not ideal. But I think the most successes we've had in recent years have been the loanees that have done well and we've bought them. So perhaps that's the halfway house option for a reluctant board, for our kind of, you know, for our risk averse board when they're going to spend a few extra pennies. So look, when we talked earlier on about Brendan Rodgers, you know, about his players and things. In his first tenure, his first window was pretty good, and I think the three key players was Dembele. Was that his first window? But it was Scott Sinclair and Kolo Toure when he brought Kolo Toure in, and Kolo Toure obviously he didn't play as a great deal really in the grand scheme of things, but his personality and around the place, and then he went to the coaching staff. It lifted the club, and it brought an attitude, and it brought a professionalism. You know, this is in a standard, right? I'm sure Scott Sinclair did as well. So, and that was Brendan sort of thinking, shit. Sorry for my French there. You know, we need some help here, and we need some quality help. So hopefully there's a bit more of that in January. That Brendan's identified some guys that he knows and trusts, because that's what all of us are doing. You go to your go-to people, don't you? First and foremost, who you know won't let you down and can come in and do a job. Maybe Nat Phillips is one of those people because he's known him from a previous life, or maybe he will go back. I don't know. But I think that's what I can see Brendan doing. Is dipping in to somewhere he's been before, or someone he knows well, to bring in that quality.
He has spoken time and time again, Lawrence, and I want to talk about the kind of changes that we've seen just since Brendan came back. I was talking a wee bit about it yesterday on the Wander Round Paradise. I was told I should have called it the Donder Round Paradise. And we had to actually negotiate snow for the first time. Probably won't be the last yesterday. But what I was talking about, Lawrence, was the change in Brendan Rodgers. For the first time round, he comes in a blaze of glory. And, you know, everybody's up at Celtic Park, 13,000 fans there to greet him. Scenes never before seen for an incoming manager. And obviously, invincible treble. He's untouchable really in that first season. Transfer window, like Ian says, you know, he's bringing in guys who became heroes at the club. Brilliant. But as the time, you know, went on and the bad signings started to come in, and maybe the control that he had, and he's only spoken about it since he's come back. He was saying that, you know, there was a standard of player, Lawrence, that was there in his mind, and the ones he was being presented with were over here. They weren't going to enhance his squad. They weren't going to allow him to progress the team that he was building. He's come back and he's been kind of more low-key, Lawrence, I feel. More low-key, more humble. And even when he's been presented with players there in the summer transfer window, he's been, you know, almost like a politician when he's talking about it, because he knows he needs to keep those guys on side. He's maybe going to have to play them, and he has played quite a few of them, not all of them. So he's saying, they're my boys. I've signed them off. I'm happy with them. They're at the standard. But that has gradually changed. And it's kind of changed through poor performances domestically, and also the fact that we've not got enough in the Champions League. And it came to a head at the weekend after the game. He says it's the angriest he's ever been as a coach at half-time. He's obviously read the riot act in the dressing room, Lawrence. He's talking about guys who were too comfortable. They were too comfortable on that part. Who knows who he was talking about? But it seems to have come to a head. And it's not by design, I don't think. It's a very natural thing. And we seemed to get a wee bit more fire out of Brendan Rodgers as a result of it. Is it a turning point, Lawrence? Is it a turning point? Is the timing of it good in that we're just about to enter another transfer window? Is it going to make a difference to the style and the quality of player that we bring in?
Listen, hopefully it's a turning point, because I don't think that team could get any worse than the first half. You know, so it's got to be a turning point. You know, Brendan's obviously, you know, he keeps going. Since he came back, he's mentioned we need more quality.
Yeah.
And, you know, the loan signings sometimes they work or not, but the Phillips one in particular was a bit weird because I think it was 2 or 3 weeks before we signed him, we'd identified we need a quality centre-half in. Then Celtic 3 weeks to get someone in who turned out to be injured. So wasn't available for the Rangers game and it's played little to no part since then. We got a guy on loan. It's 70 million quid in the bank. There was nothing to us, to stop us going out and signing a Colo Toure type player that would help develop these young project centre halves we had, but also be able to contribute at Champions League level. That wasn't finance. That was boardroom ambition.
Yeah.
That stopped us doing that. And I think that's the frustrating thing for fans. It's this frustrating thing for Brendan as well. And there'll be boys in that team thinking, how long do I have left at Celtic? I want to do something. I've been at nights with the, it's like evening with nights. In the last players, some people say, oh, what were the good nights in Europe? And some of the players kind of late 80s into the 90s will say, well, we didn't really have them. You can tell that was a huge regret for them.
Mm-hmm.
We're kind of facing a squad of players that if we keep going on, that's going to be their answer in 10, 15 years' time. We didn't really have them. And, in the last time, whatever the old board was doing, and this board, certainly, they're running a business better. They're not running a football side better. Are they really? Could we say that? Is our ambition just to win in Scotland and that's it? We have to be happy. And if that was your ambition 3 years ago or 8 years ago and you've, completed Scotland, you've got utter dominance, do you just stop there and don't try and progress? Where's the ambition to push yourself further as a club? I think the Nat Phillips signing kind of said it all. There was no ambition. Just getting a stopgap. He won't improve us in Europe. He'll be all right for the SPL. We've got 70 million in the bank. We can go and afford to get someone that can improve us. And we chose not to. That's got to be hugely frustrating for the manager. He knows there's money there that can buy the quality of players he wants. He knows the market well. Would another 3 Champions League or 2 Champions League level players helped us? Would they have got us a point? I don't know. Nothing's guaranteed in life. But it's certainly given us a better chance.
It would have, Lawrence. And the point that you're making there, and I'm going to throw this one to Liam, was it a turning point? I asked Lawrence. Lawrence is saying, if the board don't have the ambition, there won't be the turning point. That's what scares me a bit, because I've read out the January transfer business, and there was some other bad business done. They were the guys that really didn't contribute that came in for big money. If it happens again, Liam, we've already seen a gradual change in the approach of Brendan Rodgers. It then, raises questions around his ambition matching the board's ambition. And if it doesn't, then you've got a problem on your hands. And this is what we're talking about. How the Celtic board must back Rodgers to avoid that. We can't have this discontent again, this fractured relationship between board and manager. We've seen it before.
Yep. I'm gonna have to rein myself in here a bit here from going on a rant, but speculate to accumulate, right? Good business is where you find it. That's what we should be doing. And we're not at the moment. And it's not just the team, right? We're not investing at the level we need to get a decent foothold in Europe. We are not investing in our commercial department, which in turn means we're not generating the revenue we need to. Our multimedia side is an absolute joke. Our commercial department is just, like, oh, how do we bring in more money? I'll just release another kit. No, right? Fans can only be milked so often before the pockets run dry. Okay, and especially now, there needs to be, and I think it speaks more to the fact that you have a boardroom full of people who have never known what it's like to work wage packet to wage packet. They've never known what it's like to be crapping yourself because the electric bill might be too high next month. They've never known the sacrifices that we as fans have to make in order to support our club, whether it's, financial jiggery pokery to make sure you've got enough money to pay your season ticket, whether it's, in my case, cancelling one service so I can get Celtic TV instead, and then being horrifically disappointed with Celtic TV. We all have to play this financial juggling act in order to keep following Celtic, and none of the board are even aware that such a juggling act exists, let alone that us fans have to partake in it. I was talking to an American friend of mine yesterday. I don't know if you guys have read over there the story about the Aberdeen fan, 10-year-old boy, who got tickets for what was going to be his first ever cup final, and found out a couple of days later the tickets had been withdrawn because he was not a consistent customer.
Right.
Absolute disgrace. Now, it was in the paper, so hopefully the fuss has been kicked up and the wee boy got his tickets, but I don't know if he did or not. I haven't seen the follow-up. But I was talking to my friend about this, and this is the same friend who came with me to see the Gambo-Osaka match in the summer.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about it, and he said, I really don't get American, right? He said, I don't get soccer fans. I says, what do you mean? He says, in what other business can you treat your customers with such contempt and you still rake in millions every year? He said, if a baseball team or a basketball team did that in America, they'd go out of business. Fans at stadiums want to sit and have a beer. They want to have good food. They want to have comfy seats. They want to have good access to streaming and TV when they can't go to the game for whatever reason. Celtic provide none of that. And the prices that we are charging now for tickets are amongst the highest in Europe. To use another commonly held phrase, we are charging champagne prices for Buckfast at the moment, if you look at it in a European context.
Yeah. Yeah.
Look at the attitude of the board, right? Look at Fergus McCann. They're not protecting the future. There's an old saying, I think it was like sort of Native Americans, where any decision was never considered without considering 2 generations in front of them. Our board do not do that at all. You talk about the commercial side of stuff, Liam, and there was the hotel mooted and all that kind of stuff. Other options to revenue. Loads of clubs. I was reading a blog earlier on, which I thought was really, really on point. About is it Porto and Real Madrid? They've got the museums within the stadium, so it's the stadiums are so vastly underutilised. Certainly Celtic Park during the week, you do the Wonder Around Paradise, and it looks pretty quiet, But it's an asset that they could have bars and restaurants. And Lawrence, you said this the other week as well, about there's one kind of half attempt at a bar, a sports bar that doesn't even say it's a sports bar at Celtic Park. All these things could be utilised to add revenue rather than fleecing fans that little bit more with an extra kit or whatever. But they're not Fergus McCann, who built a stadium and thinking generations in front to try and secure, because he loved Celtic, he was a fan. I think these guys, they're just thinking about their own little garden, keeping their own little KPIs. That's key performance indicators. You pot pickers. Someone made a mention of that before, but it's the metrics that their bosses measure them on. It's not legacy they're trying to leave. They're just looking after the here and now, because that's on their job description. And they'll toodle pip, take their bonus, and off they go. Whereas and someone else has got to pick up the slack. The stadium could be extended. We could get more people in. All these things. It's not a progressive board, and there's a lot of disgruntlement with the board at the moment, despite the fact they were beating Rangers. The fact it will die down, because Europe will be a passing memory after Christmas. We'll go back to more of the same, but we're still a bit upset about it at the moment. Until next year.
But you're allowed to be. This is the thing.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes when I look at it and I think it's not their money. When you're talking about the amount of money that we waste on transfers, and I spoke earlier there about some of the January business that we did under Brennan first time round. Last week, I listed a number of players that cost us 30 million quid, and it was over a period of 5 seasons, and it was players that did not contribute. They did not contribute positively to Celtic over the piece. If you think about, the obvious ones being a Yeti and Barkas, 5 million quid each, but you've spent money like 3 million quid on Ball and Golly, 3.5 million quid on Klamala, 2 million on Sorrell, Bernaby 3.75, and in a 5-season period, we spent £30 million, and people sometimes wonder, it's fine, it's not an exact science, and you can't get them all right. But this is the money that the club only has, due to what Liam said there. This is the money that, people prioritise Celtic merchandise, season tickets, travel, the whole thing, over virtually everything else. I mean, the amount of people, this is why I keep saying it, when Celtic fans go abroad and we go to the away days in Europe and we get humbled. Is there a thought for the actual fan and what they've had to do to get there and the cost of that as well? Never really is there. So all that money, it's just like loads of millions, tens of millions of pounds spent over a 5-year period. But that's the fans that have raised that cash. You can say, oh, well done to X, Y, or Z for doing that brilliant marketing campaign or that marketing deal. But you still rely on the fans to buy the merchandise that you're producing. And without that, as Liam says, there is no brand, there is no income, turnover, profit, etc. And this is what frustrates me. It is the Celtic fans that are generating the cash. And without that, you wouldn't be able to splurge £30 million over 5 seasons on players who were absolute flops. And this is the thing, we need to be tighter. And I think there needs to be more of a laser focus starting in January. And now, if we come out of that January transfer window and we've only brought in 2 players of quality, I'll be happy. I think we need to start getting a lot of these guys that are not contributing out the door, be that on loan or permanent deals, move them on. We need to start doing things differently, because Brendan Rodgers has given us a sign that he's getting to that point of frustration and anger. And once he gets to that point, we've been in that movie before. So we need to actually look at the situation, and whilst we still can, do something about it. And if we do improve the side for that European aspiration, domestic football look after itself, rather than the other way about, do enough to do well in domestic football, and we'll get the bonus and the bounty of the Champions League. We're doing it the wrong way around at the moment. Thanks everybody for getting involved in the comments. Yes, there's been quite a few tangents and rants. It would appear that Celtic fans, certainly those contributors to Acsom, are unhappy as well. Just like
I would just like to clarify something before we close out, right? I was a wee bit harsh and maybe a bit disrespectful in my comments. I'm partial to a bottle at the fridge now and again. There's nothing wrong with Bucky. If you enjoy it, get into it. It's all right.
Absolutely, yes. The Buckfast tonic wine has been pretty potent for generations. And I was laughing the other day there. I was looking at an advert from the 1950s that I found in a newspaper when I was doing research for one of my books, and it was a 1951 newspaper, and there's this Buckfast advert, but the way that it was being branded was unbelievable. You could buy it at the pharmacy, Lawrence. You're smiling there. You could buy it at the pharmacy, and it was like, if you were feeling a wee bit, peely-wally kind of thing, have a Bucky. It'll just perk you up. Fantastic. I don't think people do it for that purpose now. So there we go. Keep the comments coming in. If you're watching this and not live and you're watching it after the event, let us know about some of the points that have been raised today. How are you feeling about going into the January transfer window? Is Brendan going to get the quality that he's already said he requires? And I think as football fans and as Celtic fans, we've already identified as well. And if so, where do you think that quality is required? Who do we allow to leave the club? And are you satisfied that we are producing enough footballers for the £3 million outlay that the academy costs every single year? I certainly don't. Thanks everybody for getting involved. And one last thing, our charity weekender is going to go ahead on the 16th and 17th of December. It's in a couple of weeks. We've got quite a lot of great content lined up, 24 hours of content. We're raising money for wee Jamie Tierney, whose link for his GoFundMe is underneath this video. If you're able to get involved, certainly do so, either leading up to the charity weekender or on the weekender itself. We're also on the Monday after the charity weekender having an Acsom Christmas night out. Unfortunately, Liam and Ian can't make it in time, but you certainly can. There's a couple of tickets available underneath this video. Thanks everybody for getting involved. Thank you to Liam, Ian and Lawrence for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.